Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a moment to announce some exciting news that I am finally releasing my 6-week grief and loss virtual course and lots more information in the show notes about the course. It's a PDF that you can pull up and read all about the details, what we're going to be covering, the focus, and the structure of the course. You can sign up on my website, rockyourshine.com. You'll find Leap into Light and Healing under the service menu. The course will begin on Wednesday, June 7th, and that'll be held from 6 to 7 Eastern Time. So if you or anyone you know is ready to take the next step in their healing and really have a place to share and process, then please send them over to rockyourshine.com. I look forward to working with you guys. Take care and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you for that beginning. Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open. I have a real treat for you this morning. Our guest with us today is Jon Hazilla, and we are going to be talking about so many different things, but I want to start with his bio. It's going to be a little bit different today because he has written a beautiful book called Music as Therapy, Playful Healing with Percussion, Creativity, and Spirituality. And Jon Hazilla is a gifted percussionist and percussion professor at Berklee College of Music in Boston. He brings to his work an unbelievably creative, imaginative, and spontaneous spirit that infuses all he does. Jon is wired for interconnectivity, cross-disciplinary thinking, and integration. Spirituality is the diamond at the center of his work and is reflected in the many facets of his creative approaches to healing. His approaches include ways to use percussion, music, and embodied spirituality to help people find ways beyond words to express their emotions, to grow closer to their unique identity, to find healthy connection to others, to deepen their own meaning making, and to experience a sense of transcendent. Experiences are transcendent at the core of spirituality, pull people out of their self-absorption, a common experience of peoples whose lives are heavy with suffering, and into a sense of belonging to a greater whole. This book invites the reader to see the rich landscape of a spirituality that is non-sectarian and universal. This non-sectarian spirituality emphasizes strengthening healthy connection to our deepest self, others, and the larger universe, and increasing our capacity to receive and give love and experience freedom. I read this as part of the foreword to the book, who was written by Brita L. Gill Ostern, who is an MDiv PhD, and because I thought that it so beautifully captures the essence of Jon's book and his work and all the things he does with children around grief and loss. I welcome you to the show and thank you so very much for being here with us today. I have been looking forward to this conversation.
Woohoo, me too.
So after reading your book, you have had so many different losses. And I know that you've lost 3 siblings. You lost your brother Michael in 2010. You lost your sister Paulette in 2016. And you lost your sister on Valentine's Day of 2018. And so I know that we'll be interweaving some of your grief around your sibling loss throughout this conversation. But today we're really going to be focusing on your divorce that, as you and I had an opportunity to talk before today, that really was a very deep, dark journey of healing for you.
Indeed, it was. I think I shared with you that I was in a black hole for 2 years and not really sure that I could climb out, but I did with the strength of community and friends and just believing there would be an end to it, my deep sorrow, but not knowing when that end would be. And I also knew that there was something to learn from it because, and I was depressed. I've never been depressed in my entire life. And for 6 months, it was like I had a yoke around my neck, very heavy. I barely got through my days. My teaching and students really saved me because they gave me a sense of purpose to sort of climb out of my darkness and share what little light I had left with others. So that was really crucial and important. And I'm a drummer, so it was therapeutic to actually play drums and let out my anger and let out my angst, and that was extremely helpful.
So let's back up a little bit because I think we have a lot to unpack. I have written a million notes around your book because I love how you integrate the spiritual sides of you and playfulness and music and melding all of these different elements to help create healing where with children. But before we get into that, let's back up. So you've lost all of, you lost three siblings. Where was I want to talk about where was your divorce in the midst of this? When did it happen? Were you using music as grief work prior to? Is that something that happened after? So let's just start from the beginning around your story.
Sure. So I got divorced in 2006,
Okay.
and it was not my decision. It was my ex-wife's decision. And at that time, I really, again, those two black years, I delved really deep into faith. And I sort of made a personal private vow to myself that if I could get through this, I really, really wanted to get deeper into helping others. I've always done that, but not to the degree I became involved in. I did Meals on Wheels and some volunteer. I worked in a food pantry. But one of the biggest things, and there's a parallel, I always wanted to do hospice work. And that was sort of the deal I made with myself. If I could find the strength to get through this dark period, I really wanted to help others. And death or divorce is death.
Yes.
And it really made me reflect. It was a major reckoning, a reset button. That's when I started working in hospice. That's when I got more involved in my church. That's when I became even more spiritual and meditation practice, even deeper. And I also decided that I wanted to go maybe pursue a theology, a theological degree. So let's see, time probably like my brother died in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
So I started right around then between that, feeling better. I enrolled at Andover Newton Seminary. And that's actually where I met Jennifer Wilds, who, I mean, everything's connected now. I
Of
think
course.
it's much easier to look back in 2023 and see where those dots are than looking forward. Anyway, in one of the pastoral care classes I took, Jennifer Wilds, who's the director of Heart Play, came and just was looking for, volunteers to help not so much with Heart Play, Camp Aaron, which is a bereavement camp that are Camp Aarons are throughout the country in different cities. And she had a video, and I was just compelled. And I also mentioned in the book, I went up and I gave her my card and said, "You'll be hearing from me." And she was really excited. She never had a musician or let alone a drummer. And I said, "I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll be there in body and spirit." And I've been doing that for about 6 years, 7 years. So that was probably around 2016, 2017.
Okay, so I know I always have to slow people
You
down. So
do whatever you want.
let's talk about heart play. Can you tell people what heart play is?
Of course. And there's a really deep connection that I have, I think, underneath my spirit. They're precious little kids, 5, 6, 7, little seedlings who've lost a parent or a sibling. And we meet once a month, and there's a theme. It's 2 hours. There's a grief counselor, Ken Berenger, who works with the parents. And we start with stretching. Jen has a big parachute. We sit on the parachute and we pass the heart and we get to know each other, favorite ice cream, favorite color, favorite animal. And then Jen gently coaxes us into the reason why they're there, we're there. And they can always pass. And they'll go around and describe my mom died of a overdose, or my dad died of a sudden heart attack, and the courage that it takes those kids to share that is just amazing. And then we do an art project, like the one in May was towards for Mother's Day. So the little kids wrote cards to, their mother, and it was just astounding. And then we play balloon volleyball. They always get a goodie bag of candies. And the really beautiful thing is, this past May, there were two mentors who shared their story, because at one time they were 5 and 6, and they lost, I can't remember, I think lost her dad, and Rai lost his mom, and they became mentors. So the little kids see them as role models, that it's possible to get through this. And now they're going off to college. So it's this huge, big arc. 10 years later, I get chills sharing that with you. It is possible. So I just love it.
Well, I taught bereavement groups to the tween group at Center for Grieving Children for many years, and the group started as early as 3, because the idea is, if you are old enough to love, you're old enough to grieve. And I mean, if obviously children love even younger than that, but we start, actually, I actually think we did have some 2-year-olds. But with the younger kids, they don't grieve in any kind of linear way, right? I mean, and so a lot of what we did with them too, it's all play and art. And it is sort of this amazing, beautiful process that happens with children around grief. But so Camp Aaron, that's a camp that happens on, is it a
I,
weekend thing, or do the
Well,
kids?
it happens, I can tell you exactly. It's the third weekend in August. And pre-COVID, it was a Friday afternoon to a Sunday afternoon, but now it's a full day camp, 7 o'clock Saturday morning to 7 o'clock at night. What I wanted to mention about the little kids grieving and their loss is, I lost my mom when I was 2.5. So I was definitely pointed to be part of this group. Those groups didn't even exist, let alone
They did not, right?
even comprehending my loss. I mean, I have no memory of her other than maybe her breasts, so.
Hmm. Yeah, and I lost my father at 10 months old, and same my biological dad, my dad now has raised me since I was 2, and he is my dad, but same, but our memories, but our cells hold memory. And and so it's just, grief is just such an interesting emotion, because I have worked with adults now who lost a sibling when they were just little, 4 or 5 years old, and in the way that impacts a family, even if the child doesn't have a lot of memories of the parent or the sibling that has passed when they were little. So it's beautiful work. I want to go back to your divorce, and you said something that was so profound that stuck with me the first time we talked, and you mentioned it again, that even as you were going through that dark period, that you were very aware at the same time that you were going through deep learning. And I want to talk to you about what what were you doing, knowing that you were in this dark place, and also holding this understanding from a spiritual perspective that you were to learn something in this experience? How were you holding those two things at the same time? What were you doing? What did it look like?
Well, I was holding them. I'm not sure how. I, I'm a firm believer of each experience, whether good or bad, has something to offer. And I mentioned before, I've never been depressed. I'm a pretty upbeat, positive thinking person. And this was the first time I was totally deflated. And I was in therapy at that time, and I there,
Did you get
the,
into therapy? You got into therapy because of the divorce, or you were in
absolutely.
therapy?
No, absolutely. That even prior to the divorce, we were in couples therapy. Uh,
Okay.
that didn't work out, and then our therapist at that time recommended someone to. I was desperate. I could barely function, and I think I mentioned when we talked the first time, I'm a pretty healthy guy, and I my therapist was suggesting meds, which I absolutely didn't want to go on. And for a couple of reasons, back to go full circle to your question, having never experienced depression, I felt that it had something to offer. I didn't know what, but there's a great book, The Wisdom of the Dark Emotions by Marion Greenspan, which
Mm,
I've read twice. And just sitting with that, I knew there was value because we always want to feel better soon, right? Get it over with
yes.
rather than just understand it and be with it and feel it. So medication did make sense to me at that time. The other thing was I have such faith in my power of resilience and perseverance that I would want to personally know that when I started to feel just a little bit better, it was me and not the medication. And that I could take that with me as I go through life, because there'll be other incidents where I need to rely on my inner core, my faith, my inner strength. And that's really what I got from that experience. So I never went on medication. I'm glad I didn't, and I made it.
And were you into meditation prior to your divorce?
Yeah, totally. I've been meditating for 30 plus years, sitting on a very hard bench.
I'm sure, did that you continued even in the dark place? Did you continue your what were the practices that helped you? Because, you know, part of obviously the whole point of this podcast is the transformations that come out of after we've been cracked wide open. Because I think for many people, it's certainly been my experience over the years. I think when a deep trauma or tragedy or life altering event happens to us, that we in that dark period where we really sit and question the purpose of our life, why we're here, I think it's a real opportunity, if we allow it, that it can transform us and we can get to know the spirit of who we are, the essence of who we are, in a way. I call it accelerated school. I mean, sometimes it can accelerate that learning, right? When you're in that really in that dark place. So, what were the things that you were actually doing, the tangible things to help yourself? Meditation is one, such an important practice for people. What else were you doing?
So I'm a big runner, as I told you. So I totally immerse myself. Physical activity. I ran many
Movement.
movement, right, to dissipate that angst and that uncertainty. And it really reinforced. Everyone says gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. True, but even something deeper that I still had two legs to run on, two arms, two eyes. There was still great things in the world to experience, despite how I was feeling inside. So that was really
How were you feeling inside, if you had to put language to it?
soft and vulnerable. And I was contracting, which made sense. I shared with you I'm a Cancer, so I really retreated in my shell for a time. But there was also a time when I was feeling I was capable of giving to others. That also pulled me out of my shell to help others. I think that's essential. I think we should help others throughout our entire lives, when we feel good and when we feel bad. It just being conscious of other human beings, I think, really fortifies one's own spirit.
And I really love that. I share that belief deeply. And my work as a therapist for many years, working with people, and certainly in the grief and loss space, that, you know, I think the fastest way out of feeling depression, which is really internalizing, is to put yourself, it's sort of counterintuitive because as you said, when you're contracting, you kind of want to curl up in a little ball and you want to pull all of your shades down and you want to, and sometimes that's important. People need to do that for a little bit of time, where you just have to close the world off. And then, there's this point where we have to know, and I've talked about this a lot on the podcast. There's a point where, do you need help? Knowing when you need help and, and getting yourself back out into the world. And then when you're ready to extend that, to give back to the world, because I think that, as you said, volunteer work, because it takes us out of our head. We're having to give to somebody else instead of hyper focusing on all of our woes. And it just feels good to help other people. I mean, there's a lot of it's not brain surgery. It just feels good to help other people. And sometimes even when we least feel like doing that, to just push ourselves a little bit can just let this light in and light up some of those dark places, I think. And it's that forward momentum, right? Then it just gives you a little bit of energy. You said 6 months in that 6-month period. So did you take time to curl up in a little ball and shut out all the shades, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Probably every single night for 6 months. I think I shared with you. I would wake up in the morning, and as soon as I opened my eyes, there was a red neon light that was flashing on and off with my soon-to-be ex-wife's name. And I would get it together, and I had, tears streaming down my face. I would go to school. I would see my
So you
students.
never took a break from teaching?
No, no, it gave me. I love teach. Again, it gave me a deeper sense of purpose that I was valuable to others or people that wanted to be with me as opposed to my, ex-wife, But there's a lot of introspection, what could I have done? What didn't I do? Which all gets sort of worked out. It has for me. I mean, I'm in a really healthy place, but not when it's right directly in front of you. And I wanted to return. You mentioned tangible things. So I mentioned running. A third aspect was,
Running, prayer, and going
yeah,
and continuing to go to work with.
yeah, teaching. But also, I was 50 at the time, perfect, smack dab in between a century. And I'm very goal oriented. And it's like, what do I want to do? What are some things that I haven't done? What were holding me back? And two things that came out. I went back. I went to school. I applied to seminary. I didn't know what was going to happen with that. I think it was, I don't know, 2010, 2013. And I also wrote my first book, which was based on teaching. And that was always in the back of my mind. And I think those two things, had I stayed married, I never would have realized. And they've had very positive outcomes.
Well, my dissertation was writing through grief and loss. There is something about grief, yeah, writing through grief, loss, and trauma. And there is something about writing, even if you're not writing about grief, it really is such a very meditative channeling process, don't you think, where it gets you into this space. And I think every artist knows what I mean when I say channel, because it really comes through you and not from you.
Yeah.
And when you can hit that stride, and music is the same way, right? Or art, or anything where you're just in this place of what we call flow. So as you were moving through, because in the midst of this, then you're losing siblings, right? So the divorce sort of like kicked it off. And then after that, you had some pretty significant losses.
Hmm.
And I want to talk about the loss of your brother, because I think that was the next big loss. And he was like your twin. You were born on the same day, a decade apart, which I think is so cool. I've never heard of
Me too.
that.
I've not met another person with that.
Me neither. I haven't either. And then, of course, you shared a lot in common. And I know I asked you this when we talked before, do you feel like the depth of work that you did after your divorce, of really experiencing that darkness, that you can't describe it to anyone unless they've really been through it, right? It's very difficult, because it's like, I don't know what it felt like for you, but I know for myself and many people I've talked to, there's this element of questioning the purpose of life, not really wanting to go on, but certainly not wanting to take your life. It's like a purgatory in a way. And so I'm just curious, after you climbed out of that, do you feel like that that work and the hope that's gained when you get through to the other side almost and sort of rejoin the living, do you feel like it helped prepare you for these subsequent losses? That's probably
Um,
not even it's not even a great way to ask the question, but do you know what I
it,
mean?
yeah, sure. For me, I don't know if it prepared me. The losses were really, I mean, I had physical symptoms in my divorce. I mean, I could feel it in my gut. I can feel tension, but bodily, my body was reacting to it in a very deep way. I didn't have any of those experiences with any of my three siblings when they died. And I think I shared just briefly, when we first went on, that I didn't expect divorce, but
Right.
definitely expected. And I'm okay with that. I'm comfortable with that. And I'm pretty much always have been. I don't know if that's buried deep in my psyche because of the loss of my mom. One thing I do know, I hate goodbyes. And I think that's buried
Yeah,
in
me
my
too.
psyche because my mom left and I never saw her again. And when I'm with anyone close, that always creeps into my brain. Is this the last time? And all three siblings, and my dad for that matter, I had a really lovely goodbye. I spent with my brother and one sister in the hospital the night before. I had to leave, and I said my goodbyes. I said my thank yous, and it was really calming. I mean, loss is loss. It's horrible. You don't have that physical person anymore, but you certainly have memories and you certainly have their spirit. I mentioned I have an altar behind me and I talk to them every morning. I greet them with a stick of incense. So it's very comforting to me. So I'm not really so sure that divorce I'm sure it did, but I can't put my finger on what I'd learned from divorce, having survived that, made it any easier for the physical loss of a sibling.
Yeah, it's just, it's a question that I like to ask because I think, for me, I also pretty optimistic person and after my brother's death, it was pretty dark for me for a while and I delved into so many different things after that and got to know myself in a different way. And I've always believed in the afterlife. I mean, for as long as I can remember, I've always believed that the spirit transitions. I mean, that's just always I can't remember ever not believing that, let's put it that way. And I talk to my brother and I talk to him every single day. They are very much a part of my life. I talk about my brother in the present because I just feel like he's here, but still just deeply missed his, that physical presence. So I felt like all of that work that I had done when my mom passed, it felt gentler or something. And gentler is probably my mother was a lot older, of course, and it wasn't, and I was with her, and it wasn't as traumatic and all of the things, but it felt like a gentler experience, I guess.
I totally agree with that.
So let's talk about your brother because one of the things that I love to talk about are signs from the other side. And there was a story in your book that I couldn't wait for you to share because it is such a great story that even our skeptics out there that, think, oh, it's coincidental. This is a little much. You have to tell this story
No,
of the book.
I would love to. I think it's entitled in the book under the chapter of synchronicity.
Synchronicity.
Which I get chills even saying that word, meaningful circumstances or coincidences. So anyway, I was training for the Montreal Marathon and my sister and we put all of my brother's articles, running shoes, clothes, books in storage. And it took 3 years to really get it together to go back to Maryland and clean out the storage bin. So we had finally we did that. And my brother was not, he read a lot, but he was left of center and he didn't like a lot of books. But a few books that he did like, there was a running book by Paul Turgot. I forget the title. And there were about 10 or 12 boxes of running books marked and taped up. So I went through them in rapid pace, just looking for that one book. And the junk guys were coming and they suggested that they take the books first. And where do they go? The library, used bookstores, blah, blah, blah. So they took them. I never found the book.
The title is Running to the Limit, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Paul Turgot. So anyway, I think it was in 2015. That makes sense. I was training for the Montreal Marathon, and marathon training, I've done quite a few marathons. It's you sign a contract with yourself of 12 to 16 weeks of hard work and hard running, 50, 60 miles a week. Anyway, I was losing
How many? 50 to 60?
miles a week. Yeah.
I can barely drive that many miles a week.
You'll like this statistic. For each marathon training cycle plus a marathon, you probably run 500 miles. And I'm approaching I'm 47 marathons, 3 more, I'll be at 50. So that's 25,000 miles of running.
Congratulations that you still have feet.
And still want to do it. Anyway.
Yeah, right.
And back in 2015, I didn't want to do it. So my brother's voice cried out with his daily intervention, "Get the book, dummy, get the book. It's not so bad."
And did your brother, I know he was a runner. Did he run marathons? Did he?
Oh my goodness, he was in the Olympic trials for the marathon back in 1971.
Wow.
He was injured, yes. So it's in my genes. So that was an even deeper connection. Anyway, so his voice said, "Get the book, dummy. It's not so bad." Of course. So I went on Amazon, and there were many offerings, and I wanted the cheapest one, 99 cents. I mean, I could have picked anyone. There had to be 10 or 12, used, good shape, blah, blah, blah. And it said no underlining. So I got it, 99 cents.
That's important. This is a very important part of the story, and I don't want it glossed over. You wanted a clean copy. You didn't want it marked up and underlined and highlighted and all the things. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, great. And I wanted cheap, 99 cents.
Yeah, and you wanted it cheap.
So that was, I couldn't even remember where it was from. So I ordered it. It came. I remember getting in the elevator, ripping it open, and I started thumbing through it. And oh my goodness, it had underlinings everywhere. It had those sticky things, which I really can't stand. They were everywhere. So I was a little miffed. I said, this is not as advertised. So I get
not even close, because
but no, who would want this book even though it was cheap? So I go bounding out of the elevator, ready to email Amazon saying to take it back. And I got to the first page, and in my brother's microscopic handwriting, I saw Dr. Michael Hazilla, and it was his book. And at that point I started.
I could just bawl my eyes out again. When I read it, I started to cry, and I can feel the tears coming, because that is an actual gift from your brother. He's the only one that could have orchestrated that.
Yeah. And I had so many choices. That book was destined for me.
Yeah, it leaves me speechless, because what else can you say about it? Let's move into your music. Because what I love so much about you and your spirit and your book is the playfulness. We talked about sadness and grief. We contract like this. When we're in playful, joyful place, we expand, right? It's just a very expansive energy, and we connect more deeply to spirit and source. And what I love about your book is the elements that you bring in around music and play. You have so many different activities that sound like such a blast. And one of the activities...
Which one?
Right, there are so many, and you have all of these crazy, beautiful quotes from Mr. Rogers and Dr. Seuss and all playful, but deep, right? I mean, Dr. Seuss is pretty, his books are pretty, those books are pretty deep. So you've got this beautiful quote by Mr. Rogers that I want to read because I love it. And he writes, I think play is an expression of our creativity, and creativity, I believe, is at the very root of our ability to learn, to cope, and to become whatever we may be. One way to think about play, then, is a process of finding new combinations for known things, combinations that may yield new forms of expression, new inventions, new discoveries, and new solutions. And I love that quote for a million reasons. I mean, one thing that we'll often talk about in our field is, with families that are going through a lot, we you nothing can be, you don't look at the broken pieces as a way, as a solution to fix it. It's all the things that are way outside the broken pieces, the creativity, the multitude of solutions that are available to us. And you have a story in here. You talk about, what if you leave all of the teacher, that the therapist, if they leave all of their instruments at home. And I loved it because you can imagine if a teacher or someone who's doing music therapy leaves all of their instruments at home, that, oh my God, they can move into anxiety and I've got to cancel the class and we cannot do this. But you jumped into this creative way to use it as an opportunity for expansion. Can you talk about it?
Sure. So the second half of that book is, the chapters are divided into actual activities that I do with my music therapy students. And two things. I have, back to Mr. Rogers, who I just absolutely adore and love. He is brilliant.
He's brilliant.
I
Yeah.
really wish I could have met him.
You kind of remind me of him, actually.
Well, just his charm, and we go full circle back to, children and his gift with children, and he literally, I mean, it's met them on their own level, like Marie Montessori, right? We're giants physically in a children's world. Anytime I'm engaged with a child, I sit on the floor or I kneel down. So that eye contact is so important and it's less intimidating. So thank you, Mr. Rogers. Anyway, at the beginning of each semester, I have my students watch the documentary and I have 4 reflective questions. I can't remember all of them. They're, what qualities inside of you as a potential music therapist do you see? What would Mr. Rogers say now to the world if he was in it was 2023? So that's really important. So that also gives me a window and insight to how they think, and what special qualities and gifts they have as a music therapist. So dovetailed into that, I have them go home and say, bring 2 things in your apartment and we'll have a what if symphony. And they bring all sorts of things: scissors with a scissor sound. I've had vitamin bottles, keychains, all different sorts of things. And it's amazing the music that we can make with those items. Then I'll have them, which is really even equally as important, I have them put them on the ground and say, okay, so what if there's nothing in the room to use? What do we have? Some shrug, and then they go, we have our bodies, and body percussion is
And you were
so
doing,
yeah, all that. That's right. That was, there's all sorts of things, and the voice. And I can't sing, so I always have depreciating comments about my voice and have gyrations. And that's just the start. And let me tell you, that incident is going to happen. And the key word I mentioned a lot in the book is improvisation. We also need to be really good improvisers in life for all the experiences that we have, because most of the time things never go as we want them to.
yeah. And that's where I was leading to, was when people are grieving, whether it is your divorce or it is a sudden death or we grieve lots of things. We lose pets, we lose a sense of ourself, we lose dreams, we lose jobs. I mean, we are constantly grieving something, and when there is an end to something, there is a beautiful new beginning. I mean, that is just the law of the universe. And what I love about improv, it is such a beautiful metaphor for life, that that is that creativity. There is always, always, always numerous, ample possibility of outside of our very narrow view of life, you know. And what and the other thing I was thinking, I was at dinner the other night with my niece and nephew. They're 10 and 5,
Oh,
and he's just learning how to play the guitar, and he pulls the guitar out and he's, you know, strumming along. He's strumming, you know, so, sort of like doing that picking thing, which is the sweetest thing when you're first learning an
yeah.
instrument. And then that's exactly what we started to do. We banged on the table, we were like, we started to create music, and we were laughing, and it's that joy, it's that playfulness. I mean, of course it raises our endorphins, but if, you know, because one thing that I've heard over and over and over in grief is when people feel joy, they feel guilty, almost like we're not allowed to laugh. It's almost like a reminder, like, oh yeah, oh my God, I'm laughing, and this horrific thing has happened in my life. How can I allow myself to be joyful again? And I remember the first time I laughed like it was yesterday after my brother's death, and feeling that sense of guilt. And I always say, in the spirit world, they want us to be happy. Are you kidding? Can you speak about that a little bit, just in terms of the way you felt about joy in your own darkness?
Well,
Like, do you remember, because right now your work is all about joy and playfulness and the importance of that. How did that play a part in your own life when you were going through your grief?
I think I mentioned the physicalness of playing drum set was really good for me to, besides running, to really let out my anxiety, my
And
stress, my grief. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a very famous jazz drummer, Jeff Hamilton, and he was giving a lesson to a friend of mine, and the friend was very stone faced, and he played. And my friend shared this story, and Jeff said to him, do you ever smile when you play? You know? And then he cracked up. It's like he really did know. He was trying to be really serious. I mean, Jeff Hamilton is like a god in the drummers world. And then he went on to explain, and I remember this distinctly. My dad came home from a choir rehearsal, and we were of modest means, poor means. He worked in the factory, and he bought me a drum set, and it was in the back seat of his car, and he called me to said, I have something for you. And I went out and I exploded with joy. And I remember that. And Jeff Hamilton said something similar. He said, I remember when my parents bought me a red sparkle drum set, and he has a CD that's called Red Sparkle. And he said the joy to see that, and I'm bursting through my shirt with chills, that
I am
that
too.
that joy was planted for me when I was 10 years old, and for Jeff, and that joy we carry with us. And back to my divorce, outside of the physicalness of playing the instrument, there was that 8-year old or 10-year-old joy of playing this, and how much fun it was to play music, and that maybe I had was modestly talented. It was just so much fun, and I've never, and I at every moment I get, I try to share that, especially with the little kids. And I think when you just mentioned bursting out in laughter the first time after your brother died, I have many experiences at Heart Play and Camp Aaron where those kids are experiencing joy maybe for the first time, and to me that's a speck, that's a kernel that more joy is possible.
It's a spark.
Yeah.
It's a spark, right? And we are, at our essence, we are just this beautiful light, right? We are light, we are love. And it's our humanness that I think, where we punish ourselves and think, well, I can't feel this joy. How can I allow myself? In fact, I work with parents around who have lost children, And the mom who I worked with for a year has that went on to get her coaching degree in grief and loss and is now working with people, which just still can bring me to tears because it's just so beautiful the way that she has taken her own experience and transformed it into giving back and really has found her own inner light. But it's been 2 years since her son died, or 2.5 years since her son died, and she said that she still feels guilty when she feels joy. Not all the time, but it comes up for her. I want to hear your wisdom around that, this idea when people feel a sense of guilt when they feel moments of joy after loss.
Yeah, this is somewhat related, but I wanted to talk about joy and laughter and humor, which Brita mentions. Humor is so important, and it just helps sort of get us to the other side. I think joy is important throughout our experiences, and the guilt part, I don't know. For me personally, I don't know if I would question that. I mean, it's a process, and I probably would be grateful. I can't speak for you, but the first time I felt joy again, maybe thinking I would never experience it again, and then it explodes because you have a ways to go, but it's possible to experience joy again. And that person who's died and the grief would want you to experience laughter and joy and humor. And you think of when you go to a funeral or a memorial service, many stories are silly stories where everyone cracks up because the entire audience knows that person and that sense of humor. And there's laughter even when you're in mourning from day one of grief and that person no longer. So it's there.
And I love that. That's really beautiful because my brother he was a jokester, a prankster. And so when things will happen, I can almost, the only way I know how to describe it is I can almost see him in my mind's eye laughing. I feel like he's behind it. And I'll say, Rocky, that wasn't even that funny. Like I'll play with him, right? Like we'll
Of
just be
course.
playful. And 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 our time around is short, and we're here to experience life and each other, and we give so much to each other, and you're right, when someone passes we move forward with them. I call it, integrating them into the tapestry of our life. They just become a part of our we remember things that they say or things that they did. I mean, that's why we can have a memory and we can laugh out loud, and they're not even here, but yet they are very much with us, right? The spirit of
Yeah.
of who they are. So I mean, I cannot believe we've been on this phone for an hour. I'm just kind of blown away. And so we're going to wind down because I've got two important questions to you. But I want to ask you, where are you now with, it's been many years, because divorces can end in a whole bunch of, and death can too, right? I mean, the way that we process death can very much be dependent on the relationship that we had with that person, the last conversation, were we estranged? I mean, there are numerous elements that can go into the way in which we process grief. Where are you now with your own? Are you guys friends? Did you part in a very amicable way? What was the ending of that like for you?
Um, for all purposes, it was a beautiful ending. There was no animosity. And I think I shared with you up to the court date, I still was hopeful that maybe she changed her mind, which she didn't. But out of self protection, I knew when I hugged her and said goodbye, I was so clear that I didn't. I said, I don't want to be your friend, at least for now. I didn't put a time limit. And I said, I need to self care and take care of myself. And a few years went by, and there still were some financial things that needed to be settled. And she was very agreeable. We dealt with that, and and we moved on. I have no, and she's remarried. We've had zero contact. And if she were to call me in the middle of the night, I would and say, "I really need to see you," I would be there in a minute. I've spent 16 years of my life with, this woman. So anyway, I ended in a really good place.
That's beautiful. Okay, so first question I have before I end with my last two, is there anything that you'd like to share with listeners that I haven't asked you? I sort of felt like a little rabbit with you. I was jumping all over the place because there were so many pieces to your story. But is there anything important that you feel like you would like to share that I didn't get to in the interview?
I think you covered everything. We could do 20 more podcasts.
I know.
It might be a little boring, but you and I definitely need to talk more.
I know there's so much. Well, and this book, I want to hold this book up. This book is just so rich. It is not just for musicians. I mean, there are just so many beautiful wise nuggets in here that I've got underlined all over the place. And so I just want to show everybody the beautiful cover, and it's a beautiful read. And even if you're not a musician, you'll get ideas how to bring music into the life of your children without any instruments whatsoever. Okay, my last two questions are, one is, what does self-love look like for you? How do you, when I say, how do you practice self-love, what does that mean?
You mentioned that you would probably ask this question before, so I've sort of thought about it, and this is sort of my take on it. Again, I have very simple things in my life, and that ground me, meditation, but also running. I still come back to running as self-love because one, it allows me to do something that gives me great joy that I know also will have an ending. I'm not sure when, but it also feeds my spirit to help others. So when I have that love for myself, it just expands tenfold, helping others. So that's running is self-love because it's as selfish as it is for myself, it allows me to give more to others.
And exercise, I don't run, but I do a lot of biking and walking and yoga. I do lots of different things. And we know that exercise raises endorphins and it's good for the psyche. But the other thing that it does is it moves energy through our body. Energy can get stuck inside of us just like anything else. And it's that constant movement. And especially if you have anxiety or depression, like it's sometimes with depression, the last thing you want to do is move. And it is literally the best thing that you can do for yourself, along with making sure you're hydrated. And so you do meditation and running
Yeah, that's my self-love, self-care practice that
and
again,
music.
and music, of course. I mean, it goes back to the body being the temple of your spirit. And if you
Yes.
keep your body strong, it allows to go outward rather than inward.
Wonderful. Okay, finish the sentence for me. Is, hope is dot, dot, dot.
Knew you were going to ask that. So here,
Show me the
do you
book.
know this?
I must know it, right? Like I need to
Yeah,
know
yeah.
it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I highly, highly
Can you read
recommend
the
it.
title for people who aren't looking at the
Sure,
YouTube
sure.
video?
Sure. The Book of Hope, Jane Goodall and Douglas Abrams, a survival guide for trying times. And
I think
she is filled with hope. Hope to me is having a strong belief that regardless of the outcome, positive or negative, that there will be, through faith, this is for me, through faith, you will be able to handle it and deal with it and learn from it.
that's beautiful. Jon, thank you so much for spending this hour with us all. This has been such a delightful experience and an interview, and I know that it's going to touch the people that it needs to who are listening to our show. And I have to thank all of my listeners for tuning
Thank
in.
you. Thank you.
And I love all of you guys. Thank you for being here. And we're going to end with the bell.
How we started. Much love, everyone. Thank you for being patient, listeners.
Much love. Bye for now. We'll see you guys here next week.